about the same subject. These are all about daunting steps of faith when you don't know what's going to happen. If Denise responded negatively, we could have lost her as a friend. Countless times, I've approached people, in New York City especially, knowing that they could yell at me or they could agree with me. We might continue our conversation and I can immerse them, or they might throw a punch. You know, I partly set up an outreach for about 100 people in Brooklyn this summer, and the Orthodox came out and threw shampoo at us. Okay, well, it was a risk we were worth taking. We were willing to take, but maybe someone took some literature on the streets of Brooklyn. Who knows? But let me share two more stories surrounding the parable, which kind of illustrate the parable a little bit more. Go to Luke chapter 8, verse 26. Luke chapter 8, 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite of Galilee, and when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from a city who had demons for a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in the house, but in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Yeshua, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." So they go back and forth. And then we go down to verse. He heals the man. The demons are caused to go out. They go into the swine. The swine run off the cliff. But look at the response of faith. Look at the response, the daunting, daring, faithful step. In verse 38, he says, "Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, 'Return to your own house and tell what great things God had done for you.' And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things he had done for him." You see, a daunting, daring step of faith is not a launch from nothing. It's a launch from a platform where the basis is true. Does that make sense? It's a launch from a platform where the basis is true. You have some reason to make a daunting, daring leap of faith, because your leap of faith is in response to something that's already true. Isaiah went and did what he was supposed to do because he knew that God was true. The reason I want to share with Denise and I want to share with the Jewish people in Brooklyn and the Jewish students is because I know what I know. I know that God sent his son to die for me and that only he could die for my sins. So my leap is actually based on the truth of this world, the only truth in this world. So this man responds and takes the leap of faith and goes because he knows he has just been healed. Essentially, that's the same thing for us. But look at this. Go to chapter 8, verse 40. And it's kind of funny because there's actually two stories in one right here. First, you have the woman who had the blood issue for a dozen years. But then you also have the ruler of a synagogue who came to have his daughter healed by Yeshua. So verse 40, "So it was when Yeshua returned that the multitude welcomed him, and they were all waiting for him. And behold, there was a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Yeshua's feet and begged him to come to this house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him." Okay, at that point it actually switches over to the example of the woman. And remember, he feels the power go out of her. And when he actually finds that this woman had touched the hem of his garment, presumably his tzitzit, she says what to him? "Your faith has made you whole." Right? Your faith has given you shalom. She took a daunting step of faith, knowing that for a dozen years no remedy had ever worked. And she said, "This man who has done mighty things, he will be able to heal me." That was a daunting, daring step of faith. So then we switch back to the other story about Jairus. Verse 49, while he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, your daughter is dead, do not trouble the rabbi. But when Yeshua heard it, he answered him, saying, do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well. When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, do not weep, for she is not dead, she is sleeping. And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. Contrast that with the example of the woman who was just healed from 12 years of a blood issue. She went out knowing she could be healed because he had done mighty things. He had still done mighty things, but the rulers of the synagogue ridiculed him and said, he's a fool. She's dead. You can't heal her. You can't fix this. But remember I told you that Yeshua is our model for daunting, daring steps of faith because it's what we have to do as believers? Watch what Yeshua does. And they ridiculed him knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, little girl, cum, arise. Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately, and he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he, Yeshua, charged them to tell no one what had happened. The first story with the demoniac, where he was healed, when he had a response of faith and said, Yeshua, I want to follow you. And by the way, he's not Jewish. This was on the Gentile side of the sea. He says, that's a good step, but what I want you to do is go tell everyone what has just been done to you. Tell of these mighty things. When the Jewish people who were supposed to believe in this Messiah said, you know what? You don't know what you're talking about because she's dead. That shows a lack of faith. That shows no daunting, daring steps of faith after they originally tried to get her healed. And he healed her anyway. He knew that he had to do that. He had to do that because that was his job as the Messiah, the healer. And so he did it regardless of their faith. And then he said to them, unlike the demoniac, I don't want you to tell anybody. Because frankly, you didn't even have the faith to believe this could happen. What God has done for us through the death and resurrection of our Messiah gives us power and authority. And I don't mean in some sort of magic way, but it's the basis from which we jump in any daunting, daring task. So if it's your family, if it's a relationship, if it's your children, the daunting, daring task may be to suck up your pride and show grace. The daunting, daring task may be to apologize. Actually, it probably is to apologize. It's to not have to be right. It's to take a step. Do I take this new job? Do I leave my other job? Do I start my business? How do I finance my kids' college? It could be even a new car. There are lots of daunting, daring steps of faith. For me, it's always the approach to a Jewish person. I'm in Pikesville 2 weeks ago after services. I'm with 2 young Jewish believers who I'm trying to get to Mukhan because, again, I want to encourage my generation, especially the ones who are already believers, to also to be daunting and daring with me, especially when it comes to sharing the gospel. Because frankly, for me, the Messianic congregation is wonderful, but if we don't have new believers, it's not going to work. I need a congregation to take people, but if I have no people to take, well, then we're going to die. So I'm with these 2 young Jewish guys, and we're after a Messianic congregational service, and we're in Pikesville, which, if you know, Pikesville is a very Jewish area. We're sitting enjoying our Kung Pao chicken and sesame chicken and fried rice. And I hear the man next to me, and I heard his accent when we walked in, but I wasn't sure. And then I heard him talking about Jerusalem with the old couple next to him. And I said, are you Israeli? I said, Ata Israeli? Ata mi Israel? He said, Ken, ani Israeli. I'm Israeli. I said, oh. And so we just started a conversation about Israel. I told him my parents lived there. So then I let it rest. About 4 minutes later, the only thing running through my mind is, how do I share with this guy? And so I look up and I said, okay, Finkelstein, you ready for this? That was his last name. He goes, yeah. I said, Mike, which was the Israeli's name, can I ask you a question? He goes, of course. I said, do you know who Yeshua is? He goes, Yeshua who? I said, Yeshua, son of Joseph. He goes, Mize, who is this? I said, Jesus. He goes, Jesus, what are you talking to me about this stupid thing for? And he just started yelling at me in this Chinese restaurant. The old couple next to him were like, what's going on? I don't understand. Ugh. And so I started talking to him, and man, if you've ever spoken with an Israeli, you can't be a good Southerner or a Midwesterner or even a good Northern Virginianer. You have to interrupt. And so I interrupted as much as I could, but the man would not listen to me. And I think I know how to speak to people, especially after being in New York. Okay? Gosh, I remember setting people up to do outreach, and they would just let the people talk, waiting for an opportunity to butt in. You can't do that. You have to interrupt them. And I talked to him, and he says, let me eat. It was a wonderful conversation. He was coming up with stuff that I'd never heard of because who knows where he got it. I was trying to share with him some things from the Bible. But I wasn't going to let it rest. You